Good morning, guys, and welcome to the podcast. I've got a fantastic guest for you today coming out of Dallas, Texas, Monica Kaufman, and she is going to talk all about finances, financial freedom, and she'll be a great addition to the audience who are financially motivated, and we'll talk about the millionaire next door. We'll talk about financial planning, financial strategy, wealth, and I think she'll be a great addition to the podcast. So, Monica, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, briefly just introduce yourself, and I'm excited to dive into the conversation.
Okay, I've been a financial advisor for way too many years. I'm a certified financial planner. And I became interested in sort of the millionaire next door mentality when two referrals showed at my desk. One person who had the mentality behind that, and one person who didn't. And it made a difference in the outcome. It was right there, stark in front of me. So, this is something that I believe in. And I believe in using your mind to change your thoughts and feelings to get to a better action result. So, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, that's really a great intro and segue. And so, one thing is talking about is we were on set talking about money archetypes. I was giving a podcast interview. And so, in your kind of layman terms, what is money and what are money archetypes?
Okay, so I don't know. I'd like for you to expand a little bit more about archetypes, but the way I see money is really just a set of tools in your hands. And so my initial question is, what do you want to build with your tools? And then the second thing is, and it's an observation, based on what you do with your money, I can tell you some of what's going on inside of you. So I start from that position. If you're being strategic with your tools, it's obvious because you're building. And the question is, what do you want to build? Where do you want to go with it? And then the other question is, if you're not, what's going on inside of you that's driving those decisions? So maybe expand a little bit from your perspective on what archetypes are, because I usually take a very individualistic approach.
Yeah, I love this. And it's going to be a really engaging conversation because we can go both ways. But basically, we're talking about like money archetypes, and we were talking about just in the situation of like money conversations at the table. And some families don't have money conversations. Some people like hide it under the rug. Like, for example, in my family, we openly talked about money, mainly in the context of jobs and professions as a means of acquiring money. And other people are like people see money as a tool, as you recommended or mentioned, or as a resource. And some people see money as a form of security, status, kind of power. That's what I was referring to by money types.
Okay, so let me go a little bit further with this. 80% of the population is financially illiterate. And what that means inside the industry is we don't understand as a country, as a society, the system under which we operate, how to use the system, how money interfaces in different ways, and really, truly, how to use the system to protect yourself and advance yourself to achieve your goals. So that's one issue. We don't understand where it comes from, where it is. And then there's also a fundamental difference between money and wealth. So money is just that tool that we're also comfortable with, but wealth is something that can either appreciate, meaning go up in value, or pay you a revenue or pay you an income source. So you have to make a transition at some point from earning money to investing and building wealth that pays you. And that transition usually requires a knowledge and intent, but also emotional regulation, the ability to understand that you need to do it and sacrifice consumption now to get there. Unfortunately, we're 4 to 5 generations into the problem of people not being financially literate, not understanding the system under which we operate. And so, because of that, people can't give what they don't have. You can't pour from an empty cup, as the saying goes. So, it's not anybody's fault right now that people may not be at a point where they feel they should be or want to be. The question is, what are you going to do today to advance yourself, to make things slightly better, to learn more? You can't do it all in one day, and you have to learn and process this over time. And In my own family, money wasn't really actively discussed, and building wealth wasn't always discussed. And I have my own personal stories about that too. The question that I ask every client when I focus it back on them is, what do you want for yourself? What do you want for the people that matter most to you? And what is it going to take to provide that? And then let's work backwards and talk about what you can do and how you can make those changes to how you operate with the income you have. I mentioned before that I had two referrals. One of them was a couple, and they had a daughter who was profoundly disabled. Neither one of them earned a lot of money, but they made a commitment, even though they had modest incomes, they made a commitment right at the beginning of their marriage that they would live off of one income and invest the other. And when they retired, somewhat involuntarily initially, there was $3 million that rolled over into the to under management where I was for me as the advisor. And I looked at this and I thought, this is their money, this is their resources. And they did this on a modest income because they had a disciplined approach. And they lived well. They were very happy with what they were doing. It was all strategic and intentional. At the same time, I had another client, and he was a professional, and he had a very high base salary. Unfortunately, he had a stroke in his mid 40s. And if it wasn't for the long term disability insurance policy that he bought early on in his career, he and his family, he had a wife and four children, would have had a very rough time. So, again, it's that transition point of being able to say, okay, what's my goal? What's my strategic goal? How do I build this out? How do I go from earning the money to building the wealth that pays me to get to where I need to be? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it's really beautifully that you said, because we're going to talk about why. Because before I read Rich Dad Poor Dad when I was 24, I was under this assumption that doctors, lawyers, they were rich. Just basically, your job was secure for life, and you had clients, and you can make $1 million, and then if you drove a fancy car, you were wealthy. But obviously, that's not true. So we're going to talk about that. The other thing is, one thing you mentioned, financial education, and I'm reading this book. It's called End Times. It's basically I think 1971 Nixon changed the rules. He basically took us off the gold standard, basically put us on this like floating rate, and basically an era of speculation. And basically, if you knew how to use debt and credit and you knew how to invest in assets, you were doing well. But if you were like working, because nominal income basically declined, inflation adjusted, and so basically workers and savers were screwed, whereas like investors. So why does my question is always, why does school like try and like they try to ban tools like AI, they ban calculators, they like don't teach you about financial education. They say all they when I was they taught us balance a checkbook. That's financial education. Like we need more than that. What's going on?
So this is a pet peeve of mine, and I get it. But on the one hand, I look at this and I think our schools are under so much pressure, and the educational standards have slid. Okay, they're not expecting the same degree of knowledge and capability and skill set. Writing skills have decreased, math skills have decreased. So, in a very real sense, we have stressed out schools, stressed out teachers, stressed out families. I'm not sure I want to place this one additional responsibility on the schools. Now, I agree that this needs to happen. And originally, I got involved in financial education 13 years ago, 13, 14 years ago, when my kids were in a school in Arizona. And I went in and taught a class on economic and financial, I called it economic and financial reality. I went into the class. It was a middle school group of kids, about 50 kids. And it was one of the most eye-opening experiences I ever had. And again, you can't pour from an empty cup. The parents, some of them came from a position of money, but they weren't talking about it with their kids necessarily. And some of them were, but a lot of them, sometimes the parents didn't have. And so they weren't talking at all about this. And I remember the first conversation I had with kids in the room, I had this huge monster whiteboard, and I turned to them and I said, "Tell me what you want in your lives." And the boys had a list of things, pretty much what you would expect. The girls had a list. They were able to tell me the jewelry, the clothing, the houses, the travel, everything. They were able to give it to me in concise terms, covered the whiteboard, monster whiteboard covered. And then I turned around and said to the children, tell me how you're going to pay for this. And dead silence for about 45 seconds. And this one girl turned and said, I'm going to marry someone and he'll buy it for me. And the young man sitting next to her shifted his body away from her and the chair with it and said, good luck with that. And that started a whole chain reaction conversation there. The kids didn't understand where it came from, they didn't understand how that operated. And a later classroom, I sat there and I turned to the kids and I had a whole different thing planned out, but I noticed several of the young ladies had frappuccinos on the desks. And I think these were fairly a new concept within Starbucks, but they all had them. And I said, all right, how much were they? And I think they were in the $4 or $5 range at that point. They were big at the time. And they said $4 or $5. And I said, all right, did you pay for that with money you earned? None of the kids that had them on the desk did that. I knew there were several kids who had jobs where they were earning money, whether babysitting, lawn mowing, whatever it was, doing things. None of those kids were the ones who had the frappuccinos there. And so I said, okay, how much does it cost your parents? How much do they have to earn to give you the money for that? And they looked dumbfounded. They said $5. I said, that's not true. What you earn is not what you take home. So we went through the fact that there was federal income tax, that there was employment, there were employment taxes, that there was a state sales tax in Arizona, there was an Arizona income tax, and we went through this. And then they processed how much it would take, roughly. And then we went into a conversation about, okay, that's not a necessity, that's an extra. So, how much does it cost for your parents to provide a roof over your head, clothing on your body, shoes on your feet, books, school supplies, transportation to get you to and from school, all the other things that they buy for you before they put that drink on your desk? And they were dumbfounded. Nobody had done that with them. And so my problem is I'd like for this to be in the schools, but the mechanism I almost don't think needs to be from the teachers. What I'd love to do is take that program that I originally created years ago and have it translated into an app and let the kids do it that way to get the education that they need and have that be a standard. I think the teachers are just too overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's quite enlightening. And again, school isn't responsible for everything. And I realized that I couldn't. School has a specific purpose. It's teach you to go to college and hopefully teach you to be a professional. The other question is like, why is the only in the school system? Why do they only teach kids to become like to get a job or become employees? Why don't they teach them to become entrepreneurs or investors or create companies? Why is this employee model the only thing that they teach? Because obviously jobs are going overseas, getting replaced by AI, getting more competition from China and India. What's going on there?
I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you. I can think about the origin of the public school system in this country, but ultimately, I think most education needs to have, there's some education and basics and skills taught in the schools, but I think we need to do a better job in our communities. I think there are opportunities for people to get involved and teach children or nurture children who have an entrepreneurial spirit to start processing through and figuring out what skills do I need? What do I need to learn? Where can I learn that? Okay. And it's just interesting. Like Steve Jobs, one of the most important courses that impacted his career and his development of Apple was the fact that he took a calligraphy class and he started to understand fonts. And I don't think that was something that he did for college credit, but it was something that he did that sparked an interest and it drove him and gave him an idea. So I think education is the sum total of the different influences, and maybe we're expecting too much from the schools, but there's so many opportunities outside of schools to affect change. And I agree with you, there's a massive need for it. I'd like for entrepreneurship to be something that's more, that's fostered more. I'd like for different programs. There are different programs that do it, but we can do better and we can do more. And I'd like to see more. But that also comes from parents saying, okay, There's no ego involved. I don't have this skill set. Where can I find somebody in the community or in my network who does, who can help expose my kids to this? My kids don't have to get stuck into anything. I think that's the other piece. We need to reconnect as community. We need to reconnect with the people around us, or even through people online, through different forums, so that we can actually find the resources that we need and build that out for our kids so that the kids get and can surpass us. My goal, at least as a parent, was always that my children would be smarter, better educated, more successful than I am. And I want them to be healthier, stronger, all of that. I want them to have a better life. And I think I'm not unusual. That's what we all want.
Yeah, it's quite, and I love your answer. The other question I have, because you were talking about wealth versus a high income, and there's this dichotomy because because you, like, for example, you could be, for example, the example you gave with the two modest incomes, but they saved and invest the half the income and use it to spend, and then you can look, they may, outside on outward appearance, they may not look like millionaires, but they are. And then you have a guy that drives a Lamborghini or Porsche, and you think he's a millionaire, and he could be broke. So what is going on there?
I think people misunderstand and they want the toy. And I'll be honest, there are toys that I want. Okay. There are absolutely toys that I want. But the question is, what do I want more? And I think we have a culture that does not encourage and inspire wealth creation. It does not encourage and inspire healthy choices. And I look at this too from a spiritual aspect. We were created, in my opinion, to be responsible. And that flows into how we treat our bodies, how we treat our minds, how we treat and foster our mental health, and is also flows through into our social health, and it goes into our money's just a set of tools. So if I'm maintaining and protecting myself financially and I start thinking in a emotionally regulated, goal oriented way, that same process could be applied to me physically and all the other areas. It's one of those things where it's just, you can't, when you address one area, you wind up with tools that help you in other areas. So also, for example, fitness, there's so many ways to use some of the framework of fitness. So for example, function, health, performance. Okay, so you go from the base level, am I moving correctly, to getting to a point of fitness, to get, or getting to a point of health, then getting to a point of fitness, and getting to a point of performance. I could do that with money as well. I can use the same framework. I guess we just need to build a healthier construct. And that's my focus. I want to use those constructs that are psychologically strong and proven, combined with education, to help people shift the way they think, feel, and act. I want people to take ownership of their participation in the financial system and get to a better place.
Yeah, and again, really great insights. And what's interesting, because where you were talking about this area where, what the question I had is, when you talk about people's, what's going on in their mind based on what they spend their money on, can you expand upon that and how it relates to wealth creation or financial scarcity?
Okay, so when I see somebody that has a family, okay, and they're spending on consumption goods, but they don't have certain basic things. So let's say you've got a couple and let's start from the very basics. If you can't afford to not work due to health or illness or an accident, then the first thing I would say to you is, okay, if you work for someone else or through your job, you have the ability to get long-term disability insurance, go get it. That's the cheapest, easiest way to go get it. But you need to be able to replace that income on an after-tax basis so that you can survive if something happens. We have a 70% chance of having that type of an issue. Okay, 70% chance of having a disability event at some point in your life. And don't even think about the government disability. That takes 2 years to get to, very difficult, and you're not going to get what you think you'd get from it. So you need to be able to take care of that. If you're spending your money on consumption goods, whether it's the bar, whether it's restaurants, whether it's an expensive car, whether it's a flashy purse, but you're not spending it on something like that, my question is, what are you doing? Okay, if you have a family and you don't take care of certain financial concerns, are you leaving your family vulnerable? Okay. What's really going on there? It's a question of actually your choices. So there's so many different ways to approach this, but every decision I make with my money has to strategically reflect my goals. Okay. So I have a business. I have a couple of different things within my business. Everything I do when I'm spending money that is not based on family needs is based on building out my business and advancing my goals. I don't waste my money. If it's non productive, I don't engage in it. There are times when you need to enjoy yourself and have fun and do different things. But if it's a choice between investing in something that's going to pay me, or, for example, this is just an argument. Okay. There are some people who are in businesses where they have to project a certain financial standard, but those people are few and far between. I remember meeting one of the biggest clients I've ever had as a financial advisor, and worth absolute millions. He invited me to meet him at a Starbucks. I knew him from several different meetings and places before. And he asked me to meet him at a specific Starbucks. What I didn't realize was that he showed up literally 30 minutes before I got there. And I showed up 15 minutes early. I waited in line patiently, and he was watching it. Okay. And he saw what car I drove up in, and he watched me interact with other people, the baristas at the counter. He saw me interact with other people. I didn't realize he was watching me. And what he wanted to see, was I real? Was I authentic? Was I the same person that he saw when I was dealing with other people? And he also wanted to see if I reflected his values. This man was driving a 7 or 8 year old Acura at the time. And I looked at him and I said, "What were you worried about?" He said he didn't want to see me drive up in a Mercedes Benz that was more expensive than what his car was. He wanted to see that I reflected the values that had led him to taking his business and his income and making it grow and making it larger. He wanted to see that I was the kind of person that was and easy to work with regardless of who I was talking to. He didn't want me to be turning it on in kindness to him. And in reality, that turned into a great relationship. But he was very leery of somebody like me, who this was 2 decades ago, trying to project a wealth I didn't have. And he doesn't care. It was funny. He reconciled with his first wife. And when he retired and moved down to Florida, he went out and bought himself his convertible. And his wife looked at him and said, "You don't need that." And within 2 weeks, that car was traded in for something a lot less flashy. This is a man who could afford to buy any car he wants without stretching. This would not be an issue. But that was not who they are. That's not who they were ever going to be. It didn't reflect their values, and they didn't need to put on a show. Are you comfortable in your skin? Do you know who you are? And the funny thing was, that car was not that flashy, but it was what he wanted. And his wife said, "No, it really isn't what you want." So he didn't get it. They
Yeah.
came to visit me one time, actually, here in Texas, and we were wandering on Plano, and they went into the Tesla showroom, and he really wanted a Tesla, and she said no. And they didn't get a Tesla. Again, it's really, what are you building with it? They give more money to charity. They are more charitably inclined. They are just good people. And there's just no games with it.
Yeah. It's interesting because what I love about you is you're talking about using these constructs around money, and because there's so much misinformation just from the media, and just I love how you're like really intentional, and these you were mentioning some of the money ideas, because a lot of I know there are still women that still believe that a man should provide, and that in these days a man can leave, or a lot of people aren't getting married, and everybody has to take advantage or take control of their financial future. One is funny because I did the same thing. I drove a '04 Camry for 20 years, and
Mhm.
I don't believe in buying fancy cars. And it's interesting because people would just treat me. They saw me in this beat up car, and they just treat me really poorly. And then I'm just like, and then once I got my car kept breaking down, so I upgraded to a Lexus, and now everybody's, "Oh, it's just kind of like human psychology," but it's just a funny story.
And that's the thing. You're still the same person, okay? If your perception on me is based on what I drive, I don't know that I necessarily need you in my personal life,
Yeah,
okay? And I don't know that I need you in my professional life,
yeah.
okay? It is what it is. I know people do that. Whatever.
But yeah, it's just a funny story, and because like I said, if I didn't have to own a car, I would not. But in Texas, you have to have a car because there's just no the public transportation is not very good.
It's just too big. It's just too big. It's 5.5 miles or something like that to get
Yeah.
to the Trader Joe's. It's crazy. I drive something crazy like 7 miles each way to get to and from the dog park every morning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's, I live in the world that I live in. I have to accept it. It's not perfect, but
The other question I have for you, final question, is just what common financial traps and pitfalls that people fall into, especially your clientele and just high income people, things that just will financial mistakes, and how can they avoid them?
okay, there's a lot of them. One is the overuse of debt and leverage. Two is not understanding the financial instruments that are inside the account. I saw a statement recently and it was full of synthetic options. And what happened was it was a trust account and a CPA who didn't know what he was looking at was the trustee on it. And someone else was doing the tax return on this. And that is something that I looked at and said, I don't understand what the goal is of this. This is something that is just way out of whack. People look at their financial advisors and they make the decision based on kicking the tires, the prestigious office, all of those things. And that doesn't necessarily reflect skill. It doesn't necessarily reflect the client's best interest. It doesn't necessarily reflect somebody who really knows what they're doing. They know how to position themselves. Most financial advisors really aren't that capable. There are a lot of people in this industry who, in my opinion, may or may not belong in it. I'm not really fond of my industry. Another problem that we have is that most people don't understand their 401k. So if you're an entrepreneur and you sponsor one, that's a whole different can of worms. But and I want people to sponsor 401ks, but I want it done intelligently. I want you to have somebody who comes in and protects you for sponsoring that. Plan sponsorship and signing off on that is a huge liability. I want that done correctly. But mostly what people don't understand, especially if you have a properly constructed 401k that goes out and allows people to do the after tax contributions, if you have the income to be able to do that is a great thing. I think people don't understand how to use the entire retirement system and how to make sure that the IRAs and the 401ks work together. There's so much more to this. I think estate planning, once you get to a certain point, becomes absolutely critical. Even if you're not there yet, having things set up for the people who you might leave behind if a catastrophe happened is a gift. I think it's the most loving gift you can give to your family. There's a lot that you can do. There's so much more that you can do, but a lot of financial advisors don't discuss it, don't teach it, don't know it. And they're not necessarily trained or allowed to do it if it's, I'm a fiduciary. Okay. So I'm required to put you first. And if I answer your question, you come up to me on the street, even if you're not my client, if I answer the question, I have to put you first. I'm on the hook for it, which is a rough place to be. I need to know you. I need to understand your situation. I need to understand your risk tolerance. I need to understand what else you have before I can come up with an answer. But the basic thing is people need to learn the systems and the tools that are available to them. And they need to be able to work with those tools to advance themselves. And that's what I want to see happen. Those are the pitfalls. It's understanding the debt thing, understanding the need for an emergency fund and what that is. Some of the old fashioned rules may or may not apply. And then the other thing is, I think there's some real unrealistic expectations for investment returns over time. And that's another problem. And then the last thing is people buy into two things. One, they buy into certain products that may or may not actually suit the goals for which you bought them. So insurance is insurance, it is not necessarily an investment. And then the second piece of that is, I'm going to leave it at that. Actually, we can continue this for another conversation. There's a lot there. So
Yeah.
those are the pitfalls. Oh, you just need to really think through where you're getting your advice, what you need to know, what's available to you, how to use and maximize your access to the system for the lowest cost possible.
Mhm.
Also, big rule. It's not your nominal return, it's your real return. And it's your return after your fees, after your taxes. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's that nominal number may be great, but if at the end of the day your accountant is screaming at you or screaming at me as your advisor, then we got a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's why I love finance. It's just so intricate. There's just so many ways of looking at things. And how can people find out more about you and reach out to you, connect with you, and work with you?
Okay, so I have two websites. The first one is www.harmonyam, that stands for assetmanagement.com. We are an RIA and we have offices in Scottsdale, Dallas, and in Florida. So we're available that way. You can reach out to us there. My email is mkaufman, Kaufman, at harmonyam.com. And we have a new program called the Wealth Academy, the Harmony Wealth Academy. That's the website, and you can reach out to us there. But the Wealth Academy is something that I'd love to talk about. It's an opportunity for you to get a reset and an opportunity for you to learn to step back a little bit and
Mhm.
learn how to build the system and build the team that you want that works for you.
Yeah, I love that. Really enjoyed this conversation, and really great insights, and keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. I loved being here, and I wish you and your audience all the best. Go forth and conquer, build it out.